Welcome to Zulu Time, episode number 1. This is me. So Zulu Time is going to be a podcast, a daily podcast that I'm going to do. And I'm actually committing to doing one every day for 365 days. Why am I doing this? Call me crazy. But I usually get different mentors and, for different stages. And one of these guys, his name is Russell Brunson. He talks about the power of, every day putting something out. So he says that we need to be committed 365 days. So I'm committing 365 days to every day to do a Zulu Time podcast. So that's going to be 365 episodes. The first episode is going to be who I am, who am I? And, I don't even know. I think that a question for everybody is ever going, we're always figuring a little bit more about ourselves. So, and that's cool, and so for this, I'm just going to, go off these questions. They're called the Epiphany Bridge questions, and they actually use these questions to make a lot of the movies in Hollywood because it shows a lot of the journeys, and most of the great movies has the same script. So there's just good questions to kind of pick our brain and see, what comes out of it. So here we go. So Zulu Time episode number 1. Welcome everybody. And so the first thing is that, who am I? My name is Zuleta. I was born in Colombia originally. And my backstory is a little bit crazy. So I grew up in Colombia, in Medellin, Colombia, and there was a lot of shit going on in Colombia at that time. A lot of stuff going on. There was drug dealers, there was bombs, there were shootings. All kinds of crazy stuff. The first, thinking about things that kind of shape you. One time I remember that I was like 10 years old and I walk up to my uncle and he's like giving me shots of aguardiente. And at that time, I'm like, this is what men do. This is what a man is. And so little did I know that this is going to haunt me later down in my life, starting to gain these beliefs that this is what a man is and so on. So I think that was the early memories. Another early memories, we were in our balcony and I remember that, somebody came down and they were gonna tell us that, bad news at that time, and it was that my father had been shot. And we came down. I remember a yellow taxi pulled up, and there was some bad feeling about it for some reason. It's like you can tell something. And there was a bad feeling about it, and so we go down, and it was my immediate family with me, and they told us the news. And so this would change our lives forever. That my father had been killed. And so I think that shaped a lot of my life. Continuing to grow up in Colombia, then, there was a lot of shootings. I remember as a kid, just many, many shootings all the time, like once a week around my neighborhood, ba, 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 ba. A lot of time, all the time. And so you kind of get used to it, but I later in life, you kind of realize that that's not normal. But you get used to it there, and and people go, and so there's shootings all the time, and sometimes there is shootings that stand up more than other ones. I think one time I remember we were in a balcony, and we just heard this crazy explosion, and it blew me all the way back. There was a couple of family members in the balcony, and it had been a grenade that somebody was playing a game with, like in the park next to us, and the guy, blew himself up pretty much. And so these are kind of like the crazy memories from my childhood. And, there's so many stories with that. Also, I think at the same time, of course, we were not wealthy. And so we were kind of looking for opportunities. And I remember my uncle brought this lady that he said that she had this secret sauce to make air fresheners so that we could sell them on the streets. And we made such a big deal out of this meeting, and I remember she coming out to our house and she gave us this list of all the things that was going to go into this secret recipe to make these secret air fresheners that would make us millions, in our heads. And we paid her like tons of money for this recipe. And so then I remember that me and my brother, we went to go get, we were like 10 or 9 maybe at that time. And so we went to like a scavenger hunt. We went down the list after we paid this woman for this secret recipe, and we went down to like this chemist to find these different ingredients, And so I remember that we walked into the first ingredient booth and we started listing, hey, we need this, like this scent, that scent, we need this chemical, that chemical. And the guy's like, oh, you're making an air freshener. You also need this, that. And we were like, we paid for this secret sauce when all we had to do was come here. So I think that was a big lesson for me that shaped, some of the things regarding to do with business. I realized then that you don't have to, that there's not a secret per se, that, of course, guidance is an important factor. But many times when you go yourself and you rely on yourself to take that initiative, you find the answer. And I think a lot of, and so that, so we were used to sell these air fresheners in the street. And I think that kind of ignited the business sense. And I think, in a weird way too, as kids, we grew up and we saw these mafia guys in the TV all the time. And I think we kind of took that as a role model, and it is so crazy. But I think a lot of people, or for me, that was kind of my experience at that time. And you kind of look up to these people because they're powerful and they have money. And so I think in a weird way that starts creating like an inquiry for business, And so, we were selling these air fresheners in the street. And that was probably my first interaction with business ourselves, And also I think another memories that stand up as to that is relevant to now is that I remember that as a kid, I used to play as a doctor, when I was like 8, and I used to give my cousin little shots, playing like I was treating him when he was sick, And I just remember that as a kid, just playing doctor all the time. And so it almost seems like, violence and the political stuff that was going on in Colombia shaped a lot of who I was. And that constant adrenaline and that constant, close to danger and uncertainty, I think that shaped a lot of who I am. The business part of things, as much as, in a macro level in Colombia, and also like me, like with my brother and going out in the streets and selling these air fresheners. And so I think that shaped a lot of it. And then, playing as a doctor, somehow I had this dream of becoming a doctor at some point. And so, there it goes. And so then that goes into that my desires right now. And my desires right now is I want to really change the current status of the healthcare system around the globe. And of course, in terms of the struggle, externally, of course, there is a lot of things to overcome there. Of course, there is systems in place. There is the healthcare system, of course, and many things around the world. There is things like money and resources when people don't have access to healthcare, and so those external challenges also, our field, our practitioners, we all have a lot of limiting beliefs, me, myself. And so that creates a lot of, anytime you want change, you're going to get pushback. You're gonna get pushback. So I think in terms of what's going to be the main roadblock to that is those external struggles. Internally, I think is like the struggle. The first one of the first struggles I think was maybe confidence about the what impacts health, what really impacts health, like diet, exercise, and community, and your surroundings, and your city, and how much that impacts our health, and confidence in knowing and standing on that truth. I think that was pretty much my first my internal struggle. And in terms of an example of the external struggle, yeah, I think was probably many times I practiced medicine in Alabama at the beginning, and there is like the worst health markers with a couple other states in diabesity, what we call now diabesity. And I think the struggle was when I started to realize, I would practice medicine, and patients would come in, and I would give them, what I was kind of taught, maybe by guidelines. Okay, this is what this patient needs for diabetes. This is what this patient needs for cholesterol. This is what this patient needs for obesity. This is what this patient needs for depression. And you just kind of write off, because this is the guideline. And even though there is like this sense of like, oh yeah, lifestyle modifications, but I really didn't know that. I really didn't know that until I think it was these habits that I brought from Colombia, and probably my wounds from my childhood, and habits, and all of these led me into like self-destructive behaviors, and I ended up pretty much shooting myself on the foot, and ended up in a lot of trouble. I was like partying all the time, and I created self-destruction pretty much. And I remember just being in such a dark place, because I just felt so guilty. I gotten in trouble. I remember one night, and I just remember the next day, I just felt so bad. I was like in such a dark place. My life felt like it was in pieces, really. I didn't know like how I was gonna build it back, and I was just like in pieces, like you're trying to. It's almost like nothing fits, and you can't make sense of why I did that and what's going on. And it was mainly, driving and drinking, and I got in major trouble. And just that next day, I just remember being in such a dark place. And days go by, and people supported me a lot. My family and my close people supported me a lot, and the medical community supported me a lot through putting like frameworks that I needed to do to be able to make sure that I was okay, to make sure that I was taking care of myself, make sure that I worked through all of that. And so that took like a whole process, and I started then to overcome these externals and these internal struggles. And I started then to see like, wow, like all these things that I'm doing for myself, like digging back to where I come from, and like what were the gifts and what were the good things that came out of that, and what things like what things I'm getting screwed with, what things like that I believe, or that limiting beliefs or habits like that I brought from the past, like what things are screwing me right now. And so like working through all of that, in order to do that, I had to like do groups, and I started doing meditation. And actually, talking about meditation is a good subject, because I used to think that it was so much bullshit, meditation, and I thought it was like so crazy, and like what the hell is that, like all this woo-woo stuff. And I'm looking over here because we have YouTube on the other side, so just in case. But I remember one time I was watching this interview of once I come to the United States, I was watching this interview with the president of Colombia, and the guy, the president of Colombia, this specific president, his name was Álvaro Uribe, and he changed a lot of our country. I mean, he had like very smart, the guy went to Harvard and everything, but he was also a farmer. So he had like, very like street smarts too, and very grounded. And so he really impacted a lot of the country the years he was serving, and really helped us. And one time he was getting interviewed and he's like, oh yeah, I meditate every single day, you know, because that really helps me put into perspective the next day or what's going to come of that day. And I was like, really? Like, he's like a hardcore dude. And so there's got to be something there. And so when I was going through all of this, I was like, okay, I got to do meditation. And then I remember I was like, I did actually my girlfriend at the time, my fiance now, gave me this CD called The Gap. And this was so great. I listened to it and it was just like so awesome, and like just some time to chill out during the day and to kind of like just maybe tap into a different way that the brain works, because it was so relaxing. And it was, at that time, I didn't know what the name of it was, but it was Transcendental Meditation. So you just make a sound. And once you make the sound, it's like, and so, when you do that, you feel good for that 1 second. So if you do that for like 10 minutes, you're going to feel good, a little bit better, And so, and now, later I'm understanding so much of the biochemistry of it. But as I was doing this, or as I was like getting called to do that, I was like kind of like, interested in this subject and everything. And I was driving by the street in the city that I used to live, and I saw this sign called Meditation Center. So I was like, okay, let me just go check it out. And so I started going over there like a couple times a week, because first of all, the people who owned it were amazing people. Like they owned a bunch of Thai restaurants, so there was business people, and they were amazing, just this amazing Thai family. And they were so grateful, and we had dinner afterwards every time. And it was just such an amazing time, especially I was going through so much crap at that time, and it just helped me so much. And I just look forward to it. So then I started like realizing that my habits were kind of changing, And then I started like in some of these sessions, it was like enough time to like relax and to like think through my whole life. And sometimes I would see my life like as a timeline, and I could see it like from the beginning to like now and put things together. And so that helped me a lot. And I think what helped me a lot too was that the guy who was teaching us was actually a nuclear weapon maker. He was like he made nuclear weapons most of his life. It was an amazing individual. He had a heart transplant later in life. I mean, just like a really cool dude, traveled the world. I think he climbed every mountain, every one of the tallest mountains in the world. And so very inspiring type of dude. And so just kind of like through that, I realized that, wow, like, this is a useful tool. This is a useful tool for me. And so I started doing it more and more and more and more and more. And so I realized that, that this was very useful for me, and it would probably be very useful for my patients, because I realized that was hurting them. This whole thing, like if we take, for instance, diabetes, is that it was their behaviors. It's not a disease, it's their behaviors. And, and we have behaviors for many different reasons. I mean, that's a whole topic to unpack. But I realized that, wow, like if this is helping me change my behaviors, I wonder if this is going to help them. And I realized then how important all of these things would be for the management of chronic disease and depression, alcoholism, anxiety, cholesterol, diabetes, obesity, and all of these things combined. And I started really, really looking into that, right? And so then I think, and so then I go into the office and I'm thinking that everybody's going to be open to this, and not really. Even myself, I wasn't really like realizing how much benefit there is into all of these things. And so, I think the first wall that I hit is that I realized that actually patients were not ready for any of these a lot of times. If I would say like, hey, diet, like if you do the, a specific diet, or if you just change this or take this out, they were really not looking for that information. And so I think that was the biggest, wall that I hit first, when I started on this journey. And then I was in a fellowship. I was in the integrative medicine fellowship, and through that fellowship one time, there was a lady who's actually a psychiatrist, and she's an integrative medicine psychiatrist, and she's so awesome. And but what she was there to teach us was motivational interviewing. And I remember exactly. I was sitting in the back of the room, and she was talking about motivational interviewing. And so she said, okay, so if a patient comes in, you ask him from 0 to 10, how likely are you to change any type of behavior, if you know that that behavior is actually going to do and kill your help you overcome this illness. And she said, if they answer less than 7, it's actually statistically not significant that they're going to make any changes in their life. And I was like, wow. And if they say more than 7, then statistically is going to it's actually they're likely to actually make these changes in their life. So that really just clicked it here, because I realized then that, like, wow, like everybody's not ready for this, and that's okay. Like, you just got to meet them where they are. And I think that was a pretty big epiphany, that we're not like, who am I to go say, hey, like, you need to do this diet, you need to do that diet. It doesn't really matter. It's like knocking on someone's door, or like just walking into their house without knocking in their door. So I think it's so important for us to really gauge where people are. I realized that there, because then you really can meet them in between, and so I realized that if they say, like, okay, a 3, then you could say, okay, what is not a 2? Why is it not a 2? And they laugh, and well, because I know that I got to get better, or they give you some type of logic, and then you say, why is it not a 5? And then they can tell you, oh, because I don't have money, because that. And so you start really learning what challenges they have really inside, right? Because a lot of times we just sit in prison, and even if we leave prison, we're still, or even if we leave jail, we're still in prison in our own thoughts. We're just screwing ourselves with our thoughts all the time, and that is holding us back. And so I think that was my biggest epiphany, just to go where the patient is at, or where the person is at. Because if they say, look, I'm a 10, man, I'm ready to change, tell me whatever I need to do to change, and I'll do it. And so I think that was a big epiphany. And then, and so what was the plan at that time? Actually, the plan at that time, I was actually moving to New York because I wanted to go to surgical residency. Then in the process of doing that, this thing of telemedicine caught my attention, and I was like, oh my God, there is so much potential here. And this could really change, because the company that I started working with, this company with telemedicine, and they were doing, some telemedicine, but I saw so much potential there that I was like, I need to start a company now. So when I moved to New York, I actually focused all my energy into starting a telemedicine company. And so my plan was really to start a telemedicine company. And then as I started practicing more medicine and in New York, and as I started learning more and implementing a lot of these practices into my life, like, looking at what I ate as fuel, and looking at exercise actually as a source of energy for me, then I started realizing, like, wow, like this is really like what can change somebody's life, right? And then also at the same time, I was traveling, and so my plan at that time was that I would start this company, and this company would have a nonprofit branch. And actually, I was sitting in the airplane with my brother, and my brother was like, hey, what if you made it like Tom's, where you buy one and you get and then one for the nonprofit to give away, one transaction per transaction. And so that's the idea. That's when it started, like, wow, then I need to do a nonprofit. We need to do a nonprofit too. And so that's where it all started. And it was really my plan was to change everything through telemedicine. And then, as I started that company, the startup world, that was really kind of tough. It was great though. It was amazing because I was just so engaged in New York City, and I was just creating. And for like 2 years, and I hit this roadblock where hiring a lot of doctors would need a lot of visits. And I hit that roadblock right there, and I couldn't make sense of the numbers. And so at the same time, I was learning more and implementing more a lot of these techniques into my own life, planning things, designing the next couple of years, designing the next couple months, traveling all over the world, learning about like psychology and different methods, and so my plans started changing because I started realizing how important it is, like mindset and psychology and all of these other things that really go into somebody's makeup that actually results in their behavior. And I think one thing really did it for me. I was in a Tony Robbins event actually, and the one that is called Date with Destiny. And me and Mary went, and it was such an amazing event. I mean, I can't even like, for me, it was just so impactful. It was at an awesome resort down in Boca Raton in Florida. And like every day I get up, had an amazing juice, go to the sauna, work out. I mean, it was beautiful. And then we go to this amazing event with awesome people all over the world. And from all over the world in one time. So he separates the event into different, like one day is like relationships, and he breaks down like what goes wrong with relationships, and there is like examples, and you're looking at people like breaking up in front of you and getting married. I mean, it's crazy. It's like mind-blowing, right? But then one of the days he does on suicide, and that really changed my perspective about mental health, about psychology, about behavior, about the change, about crowds, about peak experiences. So I'm sitting in the crowd, and he's like, okay, so there's about 3,000 people, right, in this crowd. And he's like, okay, raise your hand if you're suicidal. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, these are like, pretty expensive event, like $5,000. And people, you had to push, either you had to push and to be there, or you're wealthy, or, a combination, or the people that tend to go to it is kind of like they've invested into it, and so very interesting people from all over the place. And he says, okay, 10% of you are suicidal, so go ahead and raise your hand. And 10% of the room raises their hand, so he's like, it was like 2,000 people. So I think like 10 people rose their hands. So probably a little less than that, 10 people. And I was like, wow. So everybody's like, you can hear a pin drop in this room. And then he takes one of these persons, and he starts like asking him questions and going into deep into what their rules for life, what is a good day, what is a bad day, and this person's rules. That's when I understood the power of rules. Like, we all have rules. Like, what's a good day for you? It has to be, that I have money, or that I have, that I've worked out, that I went surfing, or that I did this with my wife, or that I came home, or that I had a good, like, what are the rules, right? And depending on those rules, like, this guy had like rules that were like pretty much impossible, right? And he also was like beating himself up for having weird thoughts. We all have weird thoughts. And so he's working on these people that are suicidal, right? And then the second guy, and he works, and he talks to this guy, and for like a couple of hours, like 3 hours, and we're just like watching every second. And at the end of it, like, he comes down, and the whole crowd pretty much just like embraces this guy, like 3,000 people, like, that's impact. That's like a peak experience of your life. It's like a crowd or a concert. And so I think I realized the power of peak experiences, and the power of like pattern interrupt, that, people can change fast. You've heard of alcoholics say, like, if they tell you, like, after that day, like, that's it. Or people who's like, stop smoking cold turkey, or stop a drug cold turkey, right? Like, people can change fast. And I realized that. And I see Jonathan, Sebastian, and Shivani, and Elizabeth, they're all here. If you guys have any questions while I'm talking, or anything comes up, or any ideas come up, feel free to jump in and ask any questions. And I'm talking here about suicide, and what really changed my mind about mental health and behavior and all of that. And so I'm sitting in this event, and so that was amazing. That guy was like, I mean, and I realized, at that time too, I realized how important physiology is. Because when this guy started talking, when the first person he was dealing with about suicide, when he walked up to the stage, he was walking like this. And by the end of it, he was standing up straight. And so it was amazing to me that I realized that, you know, we all have different physiology and postures, and we carry pain within those postures. You know, we carry different belief systems. You know, if I go like this every day, there is a different thought pattern that creates that posture. I understood that there. And of course, now looking more into it, I've learned so much more into that, which is very interesting subject for another time. But so watching that first guy's transformation was really cool. And then the second guy was really impactful. He was a business guy, and it's incredibly sad story. So he was a business guy, and his wife actually had just committed suicide, and she hung herself like a couple of weeks before this event. So this guy was going through probably one of the worst times of his entire life. And he's like in his 60s, and he's a multimillionaire business guy. And he doesn't know how to deal with this. He doesn't know how to deal with life at that time. His daughter was running out of options, and she took him to the event because she didn't know what else to do, you know? And so just watching these men like tell us this story was just like heartbreaking. And then, you know, Tony brings him up on stage, and he starts asking him questions, and then brings the daughter, and through questioning, starts like, this guy starts seeing his own perspective and getting a better insight, and finding a better meaning for what happened, and a more empowering meaning for what happened. And at the end of it, you know, he was like finding a meaning that was actually empowering for him. And I didn't understand. I think a book, you know, there is a book called Man's Search for Meaning, and the name is Viktor Frankl. That's probably one of the best books I've ever read, and I would recommend that you read it, because he goes into that. He was in the Holocaust, and he talks about how it doesn't matter what happens to us. What matters is that we find a meaning with renewed sense of purpose. And so I watched that in that guy. When Tony was asking him questions, I watched that in this guy. He found a new sense of purpose, a new meaning for this horrific event that his wife committed suicide a couple of weeks before. And then the whole crowd, like 3,000 people, just embraced this guy, and they put loud, you know, emotional music, and he's just like heartbroken, right? Like, it's moving, the whole thing, right? And so then I realized, like, wow, like, you know, and if this guy would have came into the office, I would have probably sent him to the emergency room, and he would have been like in a 1-to-1 in a horrific, like, white 4 walls, little crappy room, with feeling like he was crazy, you know. And then they would probably pull him in, and they probably put him on like, you know, Seroquel for depression. And I'm a part of the system, right? And so I would probably, if I was in the hospital, I would probably somehow have something to do with it. And so I realized how different these two approaches are. And of course, there is plus and minuses to both of them. But I realized that that was something important. That's something that I needed to learn to be able to give that to my patients, to create peak experiences, to create a space where they could actually have a renewed sense of purpose. And so, and a different meaning, and a different focus of what happened, what they were going to focus on, and what they were going to do about it. And, you know, because there's only 3 things you can do. It doesn't matter what's happening. You can have power over what's happening. And what gets through a breakthrough is what you focus on, the meaning that you give it, what you focus on it, and what you're going to do about it. The meaning you give it, what you focus on, and what you're going to do about it. And those 3 things can completely change and turn around a horrifical situation, right? Horrifical, you know, that's a new word, horrifical. And so I think that changed my mind about like, mindset. It changed my mind about psychology. It changed my mind about behavior change. It changed my mind about mental health. And it changed my mind, and it gave me so much hope that we can actually do something about it, and we can actually help people, and people can turn around, and it can be done fast. Of course, you need a lot of power behind that, but it can be done. And afterwards, one of these days throughout the event, I met this guy, and I said, hey man, thank you so much for sharing this. And I remember he put his hand on my heart and he said, hey, all of the love that you guys gave me, as cliche as that might sound, like, that helped me heal, man. It's like 3,000 people, just hugging me. And so he said, that helped me, man. It helped me. And he says, like, whatever your dream is, go for it, man. That's what he told me. And so, like, think about this, right? Like, he goes from, like, a couple days before, like, suicidal, didn't know what the hell to do with his life. And now he's like helping me and giving me insight and like encouraging me a couple days later. So I was like, wow, I need to learn this, and I need to, like, it's like a responsibility that I need to create experiences like this for my patients so that they can have these same changes if they want them, So I think that was a big epiphany. And so, so now what is the plan? Going back to the desire, my goal and my desire is to transform the current status of healthcare around the world. And that's the dream, And I was actually in a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to this other Colombian psychiatrist. And I asked him, hey man, so what's the big dream? What's the dream? And I thought he was gonna tell me like, oh, to grow this company, to grow this, grow that. And to my surprise, he said, to change the whole system, man. And I said, and I realized, like, yeah, that's the dream. That's the dream, to change the system, to really transform the way that healthcare is delivered and that the healthcare is acquired for people, so that they can have this type of experiences in whatever range of disease that they're on. So the plan is to create, a company and a nonprofit, and now the main struggle, I think, is time, dealing with time, like being able to juggle the hospital work and juggle the nonprofit work and juggle the company work. I think externally that's probably one of the things, juggle the money to be able to put my resources and not dry myself out with resources. I think that's been a struggle. And I think internally it's been like all these different psychologies, right? Because like there is the psychology of the doctor who's like focused on meds. And then there is the psychology of the doctor who's like, or the practitioner who that is all about like energy and healing and using other methods, right? And that's that psychology, and like putting them together like is a bit of a struggle, outside and inside, right? Because you got to deal with your own limitations, you got to deal with your confidence level. Like it tests you a lot. It tests you a lot. It teaches you humility. So many times, you hear these crazy stories of people having like awesome relapses of remissions of their cancer through different, like, for instance, Dr. Briggs, who just gave a talk in epigenetics, she was talking about how her child actually was diagnosed with cancer when she was really little. And she was like, I was on a mission to like really find out how the body works and what's going on and how can I prevent these tumors from growing. And so she dove into epigenetics. And she's an outstanding practitioner. She's been practicing with epigenetics for so many years. And so just watching that, you realize that, wow, like this is such an important tool that she has. And you hear her story of how she helped her children deal with the cancer. And now a lot of the oncologists at Mayo are actually doing studies with her so that she can teaching them the ways that she did it and what she utilized. Usually with methylation medicine and epigenetics and functional medicine and all of these things, And so like bridging those two has been a struggle. Also, I think like in terms of money, I think that has been a struggle too, like, because there is like this mindset of like the martyr type of like non-profit person who goes and leaves everything behind and just goes and saves the world, right? And then you got to pay the bills, and you realize that that can get you some far, right? And then I start reading about like Mother Teresa, and she's like, they say that she was like a ruthless businesswoman, right? And so she made it happen. She was like relentless about the business part of her nonprofit. And so that has been an interesting mix, like understanding the nonprofit and that world, which is like really important in market failures, you know, where the free market actually cannot fulfill a desire. Like no 4-year-old kid is gonna pay you for like feeding him in a really resource poor area, right? Like that's a market failure. And so there is areas for nonprofits there. And so that has been really interesting to learn. And then at the same time, you know, you got the entrepreneur, relentless, ruthless type of persona. And so like mixing those together, I think that has been an interesting process for me too, because you have to have a different mindset. It's almost like a hunter mindset to be able to close deals and do negotiations. And so that those two have been really interesting and have been a really conflict, you know, for me. Time also major conflict for me. It has been a conflict because dealing with patients, dealing at the hospital, dealing with the nonprofit, dealing with the for-profit, dealing with the online presence. And so then, you know, then it pushes you, right, to start learning techniques. Like, how do you do time management? How do you do this? How do you do that? Like busting my ass, you know, things like that, right? And so it just has to be done until I learn like new methods of like high impact, high income activities, right? High impact, and high income, and that kind of lets you to like really get a better handle of like what you're putting your time on. And so I think that has been a conflict, right? So those are probably the 3 biggest conflicts that I've had to kind of like struggle with in the past couple years. Achievement, you know, is like so many rewarding things I think that we've done, like it's so worth it. Like, you know, today I read this review from somebody online, and just like such like kind words, and I was so moved by it and so grateful. And it's through the information here and maybe an interaction at the hospital where even this patient had to go through a hard time because of it, and just so moving and so inspiring to hear this, right? And people being helped. Like another message I got from somebody about the videos and that it was life-changing. And so like that keeps me going. Like that's what, like, yeah, like views are great, like likes are great, but really like what gets me going is like when you hear messages like that it help people in some way, like that's what really helps and get it going. So, and get me going, like that fills me up, you know, fills me up. And so I think that has been a good achievement. Also, like with the nonprofit, like we recently had a young woman that we took from Colombia and we actually brought her to the US to a youth leadership summit, actually under a nonprofit that is by Tony Robbins, but they do it at University of Southern California. And watching her process too, that like it was so hard, like, but we did it. You know, we got her a visa, we got her a passport, she got in a plane, like we raised the money. Everybody came together. I think like 50 people came together to make this happen. We sent messages to like 4,000 people. And we made it happen, you know, with the help of so many. And if you guys are listening to this, like, and you had something to do with it, thank you again, because like that young woman is back home now in Colombia and she's kicking butt, you know, she's like changing things and she's like speaking and inspiring, and she's wants to start her nonprofit with like 10 of her youth friends that they want to tackle. So I think that has been an achievement. And we're also working in well-being, and the achievement, I think one of the biggest achievements, we're about to launch into this new process and this new project with well-being in all the sites that we have. But I think one of the biggest achievements is being the relationship with people. I started meeting with the people in Colombia, And I think that has been such an awesome achievement, like taking the time and meeting them, like really getting to know them and their struggles, and like listening to these communities. Like it has been such an awesome like personal achievement, because you just understand the pain that they're going through and how much like real connection and like how much in similars we have, how many similarities we have. And that like when you see a town that is like struggling in the outside, like the streets are dirty and like that's matched by like really hardcore like things that are happening inside of these people's lives. So and they push through it. They have so much resilience, so they teach us every day. So I think that has been an awesome achievement. And then launching the online course where we take people through processes. We're just doing that right now. And so I think that's an achievement, just putting the ideas out together. So I think initially you go chase all these things, but at the end of the day, it's like you are like, I'm the one who's like being transformed by all these things, you know, and like that has helped me really like understand people's pain more, and like grow myself like as a businessman. And one thing I read recently, that you know, a businessman is just someone who can control their financial destiny. And so that was such an interesting and a simple way of saying like a businessman. So just the transformation that happens, like, is not a number. It's just like who I've become through these experiences is really helped me gain a lot more confidence into the messages that we're putting and that we're receiving from so many amazing practitioners and doctors all over the world, and sharing that and the experiences that we're having. Just a real confidence into that this is an impactful thing, and that we all have a gift in a way, even if it's a patient. And I'll put it this way. One time there was a patient who got a diagnosis of cancer, and I was talking to her, and then I came back to the room, and one of the ladies who just is not just anything really. You know, I was gonna say just, but it's not just anything. She does the vitals, and when I walked into the room, they had like an awesome, like, this lady was uplifted by the lady who was doing the vitals, because she was talking to her about getting a diagnosis of cancer and how many times, like, and she's been through that in her family, and that helped me more than my conversation. And so just know that like we all have something to give, right, to someone in a hardship, being a patient or a doctor and a practitioner. And that's the same with like different like fields. Many of the fields are scientifically based, right? Many of them are not. Many of the medications we give are not really have a lot of good data behind them. So, you know, we're not that good on it too. And it kills so many people, like the third leading cause of death, right? So we just have to realize that we all have a gift to give patients, regardless of what type of practice you're doing. So just remember that, and that, you know, you're gonna take a whole village to do this, and that we're all here in this together, because we can all get sick. And so and we can all get sick from each other. I mean, meaning, like, think about the Ebola thing. Like, it's a small village. Like, we just got to take care of each other, you know. And it's gonna take a village to be able to help someone through something. It takes a village to help us through stuff. And so that was the end of the first episode of Zulu Time. Awesome. So like I said at the beginning, Zulu Time episode number 1. See you guys in the next one. Go kick some butt. And thank you everybody for watching. And if you have any questions about anything that we talked about, let me know. Any suggestions about any themes, any questions, anybody who you want us to have a conversation with, let us know. And I hope that you guys have an awesome time. YouTubers out there and Facebookers out there, have an awesome day. Take it easy.